you came back." That was the only thought in her head when the man who lost her walked back into her world. But he was not walking back into the same woman, because while he had spent 6 years unable to move forward, she had spent 6 years building something he would never have imagined. A life, a real one, without him. The ballroom was beautiful. That much Imani Rhone could not deny. But beauty in rooms like this was always intentional, curated, the kind that costs something and knows it. She stood near the far edge of it, close enough to the wall to feel invisible, far enough from the center to breathe. She held her glass and said very little. That was not shyness. That was strategy. She had learned it young, from a family that survived by staying graceful in rooms that had not quite decided to let them in. Peace over power. Presence over performance. The Rhones did not fight wars they could not win. They simply outlasted them. She was deciding which exit required the fewest conversations when the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way pressure changes before a storm, felt before it is understood. She looked up, and there he was. She found the corridor by accident. Or perhaps the corridor found her. Either way, it existed at the precise moment she needed it to, a quieter stretch of hallway just beyond the main room, where the music became an echo, and the air was something closer to real. He was already there. She almost turned back. She didn't. He was leaning against the wall the way men who own rooms learn not to, loosely, without performance, like someone who had also needed 30 seconds of silence to remember who he was. He glanced at her when she entered. Not with the measuring look she had received all evening. Just looked. The way you acknowledge someone sharing the same weather. Neither of them spoke first. And then somehow both of them did. She could not have said afterward what they talked about. Not exactly. Only that it moved from nothing into something, with a naturalness she had no framework for. He spoke to her, without placing her. Without locating her family, her value, her relevance. He simply talked to her like she was a person worth talking to. She could not remember the last time that had happened in a room like that. She stayed longer than she intended. What happened was not reckless. It was not fire or impulse or poor judgment dressed up as feeling. It was quieter than all of that. Two people setting something down that they carried everywhere, and finding, underneath it, something neither of them had a name for. She knew who he was the entire night. He never asked who she was. That difference would come to mean everything. Morning arrived soft and golden and completely indifferent. She lay still for one long moment. Then she looked at him, at the slow rise of his chest, at the composure sleep had quietly undone. She let herself feel it, all of it. Then she got up. She dressed without sound. Creased green dress. Hair loosened and left that way. The visual language of a woman who has already decided and is simply following the decision through to its end. She looked at him one last time, because she was honest enough to admit she needed to. Then she walked away from the only thing in years that had felt entirely real. 6 weeks later, Imani sat on the edge of a bathtub and waited. The test sat on the sink. She did not pace. She did not pray. She simply waited the way she had learned to wait for things that could not be rushed, with her hands folded and her breathing even, and her face arranged into something that would hold regardless of what came next. 2 lines. She looked at them for a long time. Then she went to the doctor, because she needed certainty. Not hope, not fear, certainty. Something solid enough to build a decision on. Certainty arrived with a detail she had not prepared for. Twins. She sat in the car afterward for a long time. The engine off. The world moving normally outside the windshield, as if nothing had shifted. She was not crying. She was not panicking. She was simply sitting with the size of it, letting it settle into something she could begin to carry. She thought about telling him. The thought lasted exactly as long as it took her to remember Evan's girlfriend. Gentle, undeserving, completely unprepared for what a name like Vale could do without ever raising its voice. The permits that stalled. The contracts that quietly dissolved. The slow, methodical removal of everything a person depended on. No confrontation. No cruelty. Just absence where support used to be. She thought about two small lives that had not yet chosen anything. She would not hand them into that. When she told her family she was leaving, she gave them the version they could hold without breaking. Work, peace, a fresh start somewhere quieter. They didn't push. The Rhones never pushed. They understood, perhaps better than most, that some things could not be explained, only survived. Her mother hugged her at the door longer than usual, as if she knew without being told. But she let go, because that too was what peaceful people knew how to do. The years that followed were not easy. She would not pretend that they were. There were nights she sat at the kitchen table after the children were asleep and stared at nothing in particular, holding the full weight of everything she had chosen, everything she had sacrificed, everything she refused to regret. There were weeks where the math of rent and groceries and childcare was a puzzle she solved with stubborn creativity and zero room for error. There were mornings she woke before the alarm just to have 60 seconds of quiet before the day required her whole self. But there were also the other moments. Skye arrived the way she would spend her entire life. Loud, fearless, completely convinced that whatever stood in front of her could be conquered. Her box braids swung behind her like punctuation. Her yellow t-shirt was always in motion. She had opinions about everything and the emotional volume to match, and she delivered both without apology and without pause. By the time she was 3, she had already begun correcting adults on things they were wrong about. She was usually right. Eli was different. Different in the way that made your heart go quietly still. He watched before he moved. He felt before he spoke. He had a stillness about him that sometimes made grown people stop mid-sentence and reconsider what they had been about to say. He was deeply, completely attached to his mother, not anxiously, but deliberately, as if he had decided, somewhere in his first year of understanding the world, that she was worth the full weight of his loyalty. Imani raised them with intention. She would not let them feel like consequences. But sometimes, in the smallest unguarded moments, one of them would tilt their head at a certain angle, or go still in a particular way, or look at her with eyes that held something she recognized from a corridor a long time ago. In those moments, she remembered him. Not the night, not the choice, just him. And she never knew what to do with that. So she let it pass, the way she let most things pass that she could not afford to keep. The house next door had been empty for months. Imani had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing anything that asks nothing of you. Then the lights came on. She saw the car first. Black, quiet, expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. Then the figure moving through the side gate with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once needed to explain his presence anywhere. Charcoal suit, dark hair, a posture so composed it looked architectural. She watched from her kitchen window for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned back to the dishes. She was good at turning back. It was the 3rd afternoon when the ball went over. She heard it from inside, the familiar thud against the fence, the brief silence, and then nothing, which meant Skye was already problem-solving. She was over the fence before Imani had reached the back door. One hand on the post, one foot finding the ledge, box braids swinging with the momentum of someone who had never once entertained the possibility of failure. Then her foot slipped, and the afternoon held its breath. He was already there. 3 strides and his arms came up and Skye landed against his chest with a soft gasp. Bright yellow t-shirt, denim shorts, completely unbothered by what had just happened. She looked up at him with the direct, fearless attention of someone assessing a situation she had already decided was fine. "You have really fast hands," she said. He looked at her, and something moved through him that he could not name. Not recognition, exactly. Something adjacent to it. A familiarity that arrived without explanation and refused to leave quietly. On top of the fence, Eli appeared. White long sleeve, navy joggers, eyes wide with the specific alarm of a child who understands consequences. He looked at his sister. He looked at the stranger. He looked once more at his sister. Then he dropped back to the ground and ran. Nobody designed it. Nobody announced it. It simply became. The following afternoon, 3 sharp knocks at the gate. Skye stood on the other side with her hand already extended, as if the formality of knocking was merely a courtesy she was willing to observe once. Dorian opened the gate. She looked at him, then past him, then back at him with the expression of someone conducting a reasonable transaction. "The ball, please." He retrieved it. She accepted it. Her eyes moved to the terrace table. He brought the bowl over. She took 2 sweets with the calm authority of someone who had assessed the situation and found it satisfactory. Then, with the instinctive fairness of a person who had never once kept something good entirely to herself, she held one out toward the gate where Eli had appeared. Gray hoodie, dark trousers, watching. Eli accepted the sweet. Then he looked at Dorian, not quickly, not casually, but with the full, unhurried attention of someone who was deciding something important. Whatever the evaluation required, Dorian apparently provided it. Eli gave a single, small nod. And that was that. What followed had no name. Skye talked the way rivers move, continuous, unself-conscious, filling every available space. The state of the front garden. Something a girl at school had said that was unacceptable. Why her brother was wrong about the color of a bird they had seen that morning. Eli said less, but he watched everything. The way Dorian stood, whether he listened or only waited for Skye to finish, whether he spoke to her like she mattered or like she was small. He listened. Dorian listened. He did not examine why he began arranging his afternoons differently, why meetings were rescheduled, why he found himself on the terrace at 4 o'clock in his gray linen shirt with rolled sleeves and no particular agenda. He told himself it was the quiet, that anyone would welcome something uncomplicated in the middle of a life built entirely from complexity. He was not convincing himself. He noticed Skye's confidence, not recklessness, the crucial difference between them. He noticed Eli's stillness. He noticed something in both of them that arrived without explanation and sat at the back of his awareness like a question he had not yet allowed himself to ask. He left it there, unexamined. But it did not go quiet. The sweets, that week, had come from the summit's closing reception. Small, individually wrapped, peanut-dusted. Specialty made. Dorian had pocketed a handful without thinking and left them in the bowl the way he left everything on the terrace, without agenda, without ceremony. Skye took 2, as always. Eli pocketed his in the careful way he did everything. They said goodbye with their usual combination of authority, Skye announcing it, Eli executing it, and walked back through the gate into the late afternoon. Skye was already unwrapping hers before she reached the front path. Eli's remained in his pocket, saved for later, because that was who he was. Imani was in the kitchen when she heard it. Not a scream. Something smaller and more frightening than a scream. A single sound, cut short. The kind that stops a mother's heart before her mind has processed why. She was at the front door in 3 seconds. Skye was on the ground. Not the way children fall when they're playing. The way a body goes when it stops cooperating. She was on her side, coral top rising and falling wrong. A sound coming from her chest like something being pulled through something too narrow. Eli was kneeling beside her, his face a color Imani had never seen on him, his hand on his sister's shoulder, saying her name over and over. Then Imani saw it. The faint residue at the corner of Skye's mouth. The particular sheen she had learned to recognize before she ever wanted to. She did not think. Thinking was not what the next 30 seconds required. She moved. She was back with the case in under a minute, top shelf of the bedroom closet, renewed every 4 months, because the alternative was unthinkable. Her hands were steady. She had practiced being steady for exactly this reason. She administered the epinephrine. She sat on the cold step with Skye's head in her lap and counted through the seconds with the quiet precision of someone who had decided long ago that falling apart was not something she was available for. When the color finally returned to Skye's face, Imani's hands developed the faintest tremor. She did not let go. That night, after both children were inside and settled and breathing evenly in the dark, Imani lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the sweets, about the only place they could have come from, about the house on the other side of the fence that was not supposed to be occupied. The question hardened in her chest slowly, quietly, into something that would not be still. Who is in that house? She knocked once, firmly. The knock of a woman who had decided something and was simply following it through. She had dressed without thinking about it, olive-wrap dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back with a few strands loose. She had not come to impress. She had come to say something true, and truth did not require adornment. She told herself on the walk over to stay controlled, to stay factual, to deliver what needed to be said and nothing more. She had been reasonable her entire life. She was good at reasonable. Then the door opened. 6 years of carefully constructed distance collapsed in a single look. Not dramatically. Not with any of the noise she might have expected. Just quietly, completely. The way a structure fails when the one thing holding it together is suddenly no longer there. He looked exactly like the memory she had spent years methodically dismantling. Same height, same dark hair, same quality of attention. The particular stillness of a man who had trained himself never to react until he fully understood what he was reacting to. He looked at her, and something moved across his face too quickly to name. Recognition, incomprehension, and then something that had no clean name at all. Neither of them spoke. The world went very quiet. Then she remembered why she had come. She told him about the reaction, about the allergy, about the epinephrine. Her voice was steady throughout. She was proud of that. He said her name, Imani, the way she had heard it exactly once before in a corridor a long time ago, and had spent considerable effort trying to forget. She looked back at him. Then he said, the children. Not a question. The beginning of an understanding. She watched it happen. Watched Dorian Vale reorganize everything he thought he knew and arrive, slowly and completely, at the truth. She said nothing to help him, nothing to stop him. She simply stood in the doorway and let it land, because he deserved to carry it, the same way she had carried it alone for 6 years. He did not give her space to disappear. That was the first thing she understood about the version of Dorian Vale that existed on the other side of the truth. He was not loud about it. He was not aggressive. He simply became, like the ritual with the sweets, like the afternoon light on the terrace, a presence that arrived without announcement and declined to leave. The first dinner, she had not invited him. Skye had answered that question before Imani could. She appeared from behind her mother's legs the moment the door opened, assessed the situation in under 2 seconds, and stepped aside with the authority of a host who had decided the matter was settled. Imani started to object. Skye was already walking back to the kitchen. He sat at a table arranged for 3, on a stool improvised from the bedroom, eating food made with no knowledge he would be there. He did not comment on the arrangement. He did not perform gratitude or discomfort or any of the things a man in his position might have reached for. He simply sat. He talked to the children like they were interesting, which they were. He let Skye correct him twice on things that turned out to be genuinely debatable, and conceded each time with the grace of someone who respected a good argument. When Eli said something quiet and precise about the way birds navigated by magnetic field, Dorian did not perform surprise. He simply engaged with it. Imani watched from across the table and felt something she did not want to feel. He was not performing. That was the problem. Performance she could have managed. She had defenses built specifically for performance. But this, the rolled sleeves, the way he listened, the particular patience of a man who had decided he was exactly where he meant to be. This moved through her defenses like they were not there at all. She cleared the plates and said nothing. But she did not ask him to leave. The morning she had no one arrived without warning, the way impossible mornings always do. Mrs. Ruth had been unwell for 3 days, moving slowly, eating less, the kind of tired that sits in the bones and does not shift quickly. The backup Imani called was unavailable. The one after that did not answer. She stood in her kitchen at 7 in the morning with her bag over her shoulder and the particular stillness of a woman solving an equation that had no clean solution. The knock came before she had finished not solving it. He was already outside. Midnight blue button-down, dark chinos, standing in the early light with the calm of someone who had thought this through before she had woken up. She learned later that he had noticed, the way he noticed everything, that something about her movements the previous morning had changed. The pause at Mrs. Ruth's gate on the way back. The quality of stillness that meant she was working through a problem. He had kept watching, quietly, attentively, the way he did everything. She said no. She said it clearly and with complete sentences and several reasonable points about appropriate boundaries and the nature of their current situation. Skye appeared behind her. "Is he staying?" she asked, with the tone of someone confirming a detail rather than requesting permission. Before Imani could answer, Eli's voice came from a hallway. Pale blue pajamas, soft curls uncombed, the most unguarded she had ever seen him. He said simply, "We'd be okay, Mama." 4 words. From a child who chose every word deliberately. She looked at her bag. She looked at the door. She left. The morning was not quiet. Skye gave him a full tour of everything she considered important. Eli explained the precise meteorological conditions of the day and their implications. They argued briefly about a card game. Dorian mediated with the focused attention of someone who understood that this was not a small thing being asked of him. At 10:15, his phone rang. A critical meeting. Months in negotiation. His assistant's name on the screen, then the lead principal. Then silence as he turned it face down on the table. Eli looked up from his notebook. "You're supposed to be somewhere." Dorian looked at the screen, then at the boy across the table watching him with those careful, deciding eyes. "So is this," he said. He let it ring to silence. And Eli looked back at his notebook. But something in his shoulders had settled. Something small and significant and quietly irreversible. What do you think Imani should do? Drop your opinion in the comments below. Imani will read every word.